Okay, welcome to Note Taking 101. This is a pretty quick guide to offering you some advice on when you should and should not be taking notes in our class and in any class that you might be taking in academia. Alright, so of course we have to start with the classic Ferris Bueller clip.
The Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? A tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone, raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
And it's kind of goofy. You know, every time we were looking for a film clip to show of anybody lecturing or people taking notes in class, unfortunately, it seems like most of them are filled with people falling asleep or drooling. We truly hope that we can avoid that and that, when we do lecture, which ideally won't be all that long, that we will be exciting enough to keep you from drooling on your desk. Anyway, think about this. How many times have you heard teachers say, take notes? And, what does that mean? On what? What do I take notes on? Write down everything? What things do I write down? How am I supposed to know what to write down? The point of today is to really give you guys some concrete cues that you can look at to further help you decide what you should and shouldn't write down.
Right. So when Rigby got his samples back from the laboratory, he made a startling discovery. What he believed to be igneous was in fact sedimentary. Imagine his consternation when... Oh, bloody hell.
So here are our expectations about note-taking in this American Studies class. It's pretty safe to assume that you're going to end up writing down something every day. And we will do our best to say, hey, you should write notes on this, or you should, jot this in your notebook. But there are times where we don't, there's times where we forget, and as we go through the year, we are intentionally scaffolding back the amount of direct direction we give you. And so we are intentionally not saying that to see if you are picking up that skill more independently on your own. Studies do show that students who take more notes tend to do better in school. Now there's a fine line between taking the correct amount of notes and too much. And so the question becomes, well, why? Why does writing down what you're hearing or seeing actually help? And I think what that is because that your brain is processing information, that you have to listen, get that auditory or visual input. Your brain has to decide what is going to be important, and then you're forcing yourself to write it down. And so right away, your brain is doing some filtering and sifting of what comes in and making a decision about what is or isn't important. Additionally, those notes serve as a record of the day's events, and while we do keep the class wiki to try and help you guys out in terms of keeping track of what's gone on each day, they aren't the same notes that you're able to take in class. And then this gives you information to study later on in the course of the semester. In terms of the formatting of notes, we don't have any set ideas about what you should or shouldn't be doing. Whatever works for you. And so what does that mean, whatever works? Well, if you've studied from your notes in the past and you've done relatively well on the tests or projects or just remembering things, then your notes are probably pretty good. Stick with it. If you've tried to study from those notes in the past and haven't done well, perhaps you're looking to change. Both teachers in the room, we have our differing ways of taking notes. Sometimes I use an outline format, Roman numerals, capital letters. Sometimes I just use dashes. Sometimes I just use indenting. Sometimes I use more of a web. We will definitely show you suggestions along the way of different ways to organize your notes or organize the information that we're giving. But ultimately, it comes down to you guys figuring out what works best for you. Write down. This is the biggest question that students have, because it's very easy for us as teachers to either say nothing and assume that you're writing things down, or for us to say, hey, write this down, and then all of a sudden the pencils start scribbling furiously across the paper. But ultimately our goal is to get you to be more independent. Write down what you think is important, what you think is going to be necessary long term, and you have to kind of figure out, well, what's important and what do I write down? So here's some cues that teachers give verbally and non-verbally to encourage you to write down those things that we say after these cues. First off, if we write something on the board, that probably means we think it's important. You should probably do the same for your own notebook, especially in today's world of PowerPoints, where we spend so much time crafting these things to give you visual and written information that if we have to stop and add something to it, clearly we've forgotten something that we are now thinking is extremely important, and so you should add that. If we repeat that material a few times, either through emphasis or continuing to harp on one person or one item, then that probably means it's important too, and you should jot that down, maybe after the 5th or 6th time you've heard it. Some of us, more than others, use hand gestures to emphasize something. So maybe we're counting out a list. The 3 main causes of World War II were A, B, and C. So we're giving you a list, which is an additional big cue, but also maybe using hand gestures to kind of make this more emphatic that yes, this is important, this is the big stuff, write it down.
In what way does the author's use of the prison symbolize?
And notice, even though that guy's exceptionally boring, he is doing and giving some of the cues that we're talking about. He's writing things on the board. So another cue is if we pause after we say something, that might be a pretty good indicator that that which we just said is pretty important. Usually we're pausing so that you have time to write things down. We will say, this will be on the test. We may say, this is important. And so if we've said any of those things, definitely write stuff down like that. There are certainly things you don't need to write down. Some of those would be tangents. When we are speaking or somebody's speaking that reminds us of something, we may want to illustrate a point with a picture or a video or something like that. That's just making the image more deep. You probably don't need to write everything down. When we start telling personal stories or random jokes, those are just to make the points more clear. So we probably don't need to write those down verbatim in your notebook. And basically, you can't write down everything that's said. We need to take notes, not dictation. There's no way that you can write down everything that we're saying over a 15-minute period or an hour period or even a 3-minute period. You can't write everything down. So it goes back to that skill of seeing and hearing what you're getting, thinking about it quickly in your brain, and then writing down a note or two in order to keep for your records. One more, gotta have it.
Hypothesized that the velociraptor, when threatened, would expand its collar and emit a high-pitched noise to frighten off its predator. Yes, Mr. Lewis?
What kind of noise?
Just a high-pitched, intimidating noise.
But like how?
Well, we don't know for sure. But in my head, it sounded something like this.
Couple last tips here. Keep your notes available, keep them neat, keep them legible, keep them in a place that you'd want to go back and study from them. It doesn't do you any good if you listen to a lecture, write things down, and then stash them all folded up inside your book that you're never able to find again. Okay, there's some study out there that shows that 10% of everything we file away, we never see again. Just because we forget where it is, because it gets lost, because it gets crumpled, it's gone outside our mental zone. And we'd hate for that 10% that you've filed away to get lost. And one last thing, how do you know if your notes are good? Kind of mentioned this earlier. Look at what you're taking notes for. Is it for a project, for a paper, for knowing that there's an open note quiz tomorrow? And then look and see how you do on those items. And if you're able to study from your notes and do pretty well, those are probably some pretty decent notes. If we give you an open note quiz and you find that you have way too much information in there, maybe dial it back a little bit. At the same time, if you're not finding your answers in your open notes during that quiz, perhaps you need to take a little bit more. And so use this as a practicing opportunity. We as adults take notes all the time. Every time I'm in a staff meeting, every time I'm looking at a computer manual or reading a book even, I'm definitely taking notes. And so, we've had many years of experience, but just like any skill, note-taking takes time. And so don't get too hard on yourself. Just take it easy, but start slowly, get some things down, get in the habit of doing it, and be reflective of how you did. Obviously, never fall asleep.
Earrings, oversizing of accessories in general is very popular now. For instance, garments with a Far Eastern influence are really breaking out this year.
And that's it. Should you have any questions, as always, please do not hesitate to ask. Make sure we hear your questions and comments so that we can better help you guys this year and future students in our class. Thanks so much. Have a good one.